Bring the meeting to order. I don't think we need to make introductions, we've already done that, and let's see, we have a guest, we have Cody, hi. And the agenda was really on the 15th, I think Anupam and Julie both had an opportunity to watch the presentation. So that was basically the presentation we had worked on in November, and then it had just not, we hadn't done it until mid-January. So what we were thinking is we wanted to touch base, make sure we don't want to add anything new to that presentation, but if you felt like there were aspects of our work that had not, that we didn't highlight enough, or we weren't clear on, or you felt like we needed to address.
And the idea is to send that in a email to the counselor saying, you know, before your next workshop,
Right,
these things might be
yeah,
helpful.
I was getting there. So there was one question that came up, Joe took note of it, she'll share in a minute, from Brad. And so the idea is that we would just, if anything came up in that we didn't answer, or you felt like we needed to expand a little bit on for clarity purposes, because we're not going to give them any like new information. Our presentation is done. We did that. And so, and I'm just, we're curious to hear your input, because that's the goal would be, we'll craft an email and send it on. I don't know for sure, maybe Linda can help us with that, but I believe they will. I don't know if it's the next work session they're gonna continue their work, or if it's, I don't know when that is.
Makes sense if they could, so it's fresh.
Yeah.
Fresh, and I would say the other kind of vibe that I picked up on is that they're ready to have the conversation, right?
Right.
And so.
That's exactly right. They, I'm sure you got that too, is. I don't think they need any new information or opinions, this is just clarifying. They feel like they have the information, they're ready to get together with themselves and have those conversations.
Cody, did you watch the presentation?
I was in attendance virtually, yes, yeah.
So is Linda, I think.
Nope.
Okay, never mind.
Now here she comes, so.
Was the question for Cody, was there anything he thought I'd be curious.
Yeah, me too. I just didn't know if you had seen it. Let's wait for 30 seconds.
Oh, for
Linda's on her way, so yeah, let's just wait. I don't want to put pressure on her when she. But yeah, Cody, so if you had any observations or insights that would be.
Sorry, I locked myself out of the house.
Oh, no.
Not a smart thing to do.
Yeah, come on over and get settled.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It's been a while, but I have done that too.
Oh.
We've all done it, yeah.
My days of climbing in my own window.
That's
Yeah.
what you get for locking your door.
I know.
If you didn't do it in the middle of the night and you're not wearing much.
Yeah.
Oh, I've done that.
I've done that in Spokane, I climbed to the window.
Somebody did that at the STR near us with the hot tub. They went in the hot tub and then.
Oh, no. Oh,
God.
I hope they had a swimming suit on.
Yeah.
Hard to say, they had a towel, so.
I've told this story before, but when I was living on 3rd Street while my house was being built, I had a woman come knock at the door at 9 o'clock
Yes.
at night in her swimming suit.
Oh, you're.
Oh, that would be bad. So I just started it, and then Cody's joining us, and.
Oh, good. Hi, Cody.
Danielle had a personal emergency, and Leslie is out of the. I don't know if she's out of the country, but she is resigning from the committee because she's moving out of the country. So what we, just to quickly summarize, is both Anupam and Julie had a chance to watch the presentation. And we did on the 15th, and so we were just asking for clarifying input. Our thoughts were, because a question or two did come up during that presentation that we're going to respond to, and Grace's going to speak to those. So we thought we'd just send an email to counselors, just answering those questions. No really new information, but just clarifying. And if if committee members felt like there was something we could articulate a little better, or we didn't, reflecting the work, we wanted to hear that. So that's where we are, and Cody was gonna start, cause he joined our meeting. Did I summarize that right? Okay. Completely. Welcome, Cody.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I thought you guys did a great job. It was clear, it was concise. Obviously, it's just a ton of content to go through. I agree. I don't think, and this is me just speaking on my end. You have an actual council member in the room, but I don't think council needs any further information. I mean, you guys have done a great job on the research end and on the presentation end. There are obviously just other projects happening right now. We'll say specifically uh, trying to plug in more housing units, specifically affordable and workforce housing, and that's a very large conversation, and so we're really talking about homes to own, or at least homes to rent long term, and you're talking about short term rentals. And so I think those are two vastly different conversations. And then we were also talking about revenue diversification, and that committee's obviously not meeting anymore, but that seemed to be what council was getting at a little bit, is there is a need for revenue diversification if we're thinking of stunting this revenue stream. That was kind of my feel. And so it was just a lot of information with a lot of unanswered questions, really regarding more permanent forms of housing, and then more revenue diversification. And then you're kind of sitting in the middle of that very large chasm. I don't know. I think that's kind of where we're sitting. So again, on your end, I thought you guys did great. Again, concise, clear, great research, great presentation. There's just a lot of moving parts right now, and I'm wondering where council's going to want to go from here, and then where staff as a whole, including Layla, will want to go from here. And that's not to mention even I know the density proximity tool was brought up a handful of times, and the ease or complexity of implementing that at the staff level, and that's another conversation too. Yeah, so I think there's just a lot of moving parts. I would wonder what others are thinking at this point too.
Okay, thank you. Julie or Anna?
Julie?
Oh, I didn't really have, the only two things that I think that you touched on in the presentation, but I'm not sure, and this could just be, I was tuning out a bit, is that the 17.5% option obviously has fairly drastic impact on staffing and need to constantly monitor how many new homes are permitted and then added to that ceiling of 17, that population of 17.5 that it's based on. So that's constant and would always need to be, it's almost like a constant moving target, which the other two don't have that. Even if you use the proximity tool, don't have that kind of constant need for monitoring. So that was just one thing that struck me, is I wasn't sure that, I mean, maybe council does realize that or not, I'm not sure. But as all these homes are being built and all the new construction, you have to constantly be recalculating where you are, and that's, a job. The only other thing I noted in there was when we were talking about evaluating the current state of short-term rentals and talking about that there have not been an increase or are not a significant number of complaints, that's not necessarily a great read on how people feel about short-term rentals, because there can be, 8 short-term rentals on your street, no one's violating any codes, but it's still very annoying. And people are annoyed at having 8 short-term rentals and all the cars and all the people. So that was just one thing that struck me.
Speaking to that, I went back and looked at the 2023 survey this morning, I don't know why. But the main, when the question was asked, are you affected by short-term rentals near you? And if so, what are the main things that bother you? And number one was, parking, and I think number three was traffic. And those are things that, the code enforcement can't do anything about.
Right,
There are things that will still be there, which ties into the proximity, and I think that's something that we didn't really say specifically, that maybe is one thing that we could add to the, just as a note.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, well, maybe I'll park my thoughts on that. Because I think we'll have a discussion on traffic and parking to some extent, and even if that's just, there's not a whole lot of influence we can have, or it's challenging to enforce, which is, I think what we've heard. But, I mean, maybe the short and sweet from me is that I do think like occupancy will help a little bit with that. And I do think, if we were to do proximity, if it breaks up these, 8 homes on a street, maybe it creates a more balanced feel of like parking or whatever the impacts may be. But those are kind of like, those are kind of on the periphery of like the policy outcomes. They aren't necessarily the core thing that we're addressing, but I think they help in general the situation. But just a quick.
Well, I think you're both right, because I think in our many conversations we had about parking and traffic and noise, when we reached the point that we realized it was not an issue that we were gonna be able to resolve or make recommendations about, because it's a much more complex issue and it's bigger. We kind of just parked it, if you will, and thought we'd kind of go at it, through occupancy and the proximity. But perhaps it's important to note that when it comes, like Julie said, when it comes to people making complaints or their general feeling about STRs, those are issues that are of high priority for folks, and it came up over and over again. They aren't necessarily against the law
Right.
or against a code,
Right.
but they have a direct impact on the quality of your life.
Yeah, and I think that's where it came from, when somebody, I don't remember who it was, but at some point, the council discussion was, maybe we should just wait, because we're doing a good job with code enforcement and there aren't that many complaints.
Right, and
And,
I don't think we can,
we can't, the complaints they don't tie in,
Yeah.
the violations.
Right.
Yeah,
plus we also heard from Danielle previously that renters don't that people don't make complaints necessarily unless it is like hot tub party at 11 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I know from all of us as citizens in the community, we tend not to make the complaints, as came up with my parking thing a couple of weeks ago at ours, which had 8 cars and the street was completely blocked, and no, I did not call.
yeah, I just had a good friend, Sunday, who said, I thought there was a new ordinance, those lights next door to me are on all night, all the time, they're on, they turn them on and they leave them on, they're both renters on each side. I said, have you called the city? No.
But I think,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a cultural thing that we
Yeah.
really don't have control over. And this is the good neighbor. People want good neighbors. They don't necessarily,
Right,
I don't know.
well, the other thing I was saying to Cheryl is, they're gonna be gone in a few days, so sometimes you're like, just put up with it, I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not worth causing, especially if you know the owner. I mean, you just,
Yeah.
you just, so I've been extremely annoyed so many times that I've never made a complaint, but, so it's not correlation there between number of complaints and how annoyed you are with the situation.
So that got us off track.
Yeah.
I think it indicates like there is a conversation or discussion that we can have, like kind of, while we're in a holding pattern with what's before council, to maybe move on to like, I would almost, and we can talk about it if that's later on the agenda, but maybe, is that, we were kind of thinking?
Yeah, we were kind of thinking about that.
Okay, I'll hold up.
Good point. I should probably jump in here and get us back on.
Yeah.
So, as usual, the future conversations go back to parking and traffic.
Always.
Always.
All roads lead back.
All roads, so to speak, and there's all those funds about parking it, but okay. We heard that, but I think that the gist of that, if I can just consider that, is the relationships to complaints don't always reflect the relationship. I mean, how people in the neighborhood are actually
Right.
feeling about it and the perception they have of STRs on their street.
Yeah,
Is that?
yeah.
Anupam?
First of all, I thought the presentation was very good, as it is appreciated. It was concise, it was straightforward. And it never lent itself to any specific advocacy. Like here are the issues, here are the options, etc. So I thought, and also great questions from the council and people and stuff. So it was pretty good. I thought as I listened to it and then reflecting on it, so I'm sort of coming back to that there are really two, including the council discussion, two areas of focus. One is short term and one is longer term. The short term is the issue about what kind of cap should there be? Should there be a cap, etc., those kind of things. The longer term is things like proximity, density, because none of those will affect us today. It's going to be a longer term impact. Nothing's going to change on day one. It's the next application, etc., and those kinds of things. So, and I think we should think in those terms also, and make sure we communicate in those terms that what we're trying to do is this. The two issues that came up that one was how are we going to deal with this additional explosion? I hate the words, these are very charged words, explosion of housing because of affordable housing coming in or apartments coming in, and each one is a unit, etc. Those are easy to solve. The council can easily make a change in how that's categorized. It's another dwelling unit. It has to be independent. So things like that can be addressed. And I don't think we should let that detract us from whatever the decision we want to make. What makes sense. Because if it's an existing policy, fine, let's change the words. So I would that's how I would sort of deal with that rather than focus and let it deal with a bigger picture, how many houses or community, etc. Parking.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Do you think that, when, I guess, when I was presenting that, those three options of the cap, that was it clear enough that the 17.5% option would need some further reworking than we did? Because the old policy, let me see how I can place this. The old policy we had really didn't take into account for the growth we're seeing and that's coming really fast. Do you think it was clear when we did that presentation? That the whole dwelling unit thing, that definition would really throw off the 17.5% because it wouldn't actually be 17.5% unless the language of the ordinance was changed. What's that?
I'm confused.
The zoning ordinance, not 10.3, not the short-term rental ordinance, but the zoning ordinance 94.95.4.
It's really sad.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
Section 3.4.
Paragraph 9.
Yeah, anyway, the zoning ordinance says it is what sets the 17.5%. And it says shall be 17.5% of all dwelling units. So there's another ordinance that says, well, there's two things that comply. Another ordinance says an owner may only have one short-term rental property.
Right.
Okay, so if an owner builds a quad, 4 units. And is using it as a rental, not as selling them as condos, but using them as a rental. Only one of those units could be a short-term rental, even though it's gonna count as 4 units to the 17.5%. In addition, any units that don't allow short-term rentals, like the new workforce housing that's proposed outside the Highlands, is going to be 70 units, 0 of which will be allowed to be short-term rentals. However, all 70 units will count as dwelling units in calculating the 17.5%.
Right.
So, if you think about that, if you calculated all those dwelling units in, but you had a large number given our relative total, it isn't 17.5%. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think that
Because
speaks
it's an
to,
off,
yeah, it speaks
off
to
count.
some
You
comment
have
that,
70 units factored into dwelling units, but 17% of those 70 units cannot become short-term rentals. So it's disproportionate.
It puts it in disproportionate places, but it's not, I just to argue the other side. If you don't count those, I'm just gonna use the 70 because it's a big number. If you don't count those 70 units in the 17.5%, you don't get the revenue that's needed to provide services to those 70
Right.
units.
Mm.
And so by not including them, you're really not at 17.5%.
Mhm.
And so you don't have that same revenue stream that you expect when you grow more houses. So it's
It's the flip
not
side
as
of that,
easy
yeah.
as just saying, well, let's just change
Mhm.
the 95.4,
well, I think.
because it has consequences.
Right, and I think fundamentally, and this is gonna be a tough call for the council, is to think about this. We can't keep depending, we need to diversify.
Oh,
Okay,
amen.
period. Because otherwise, we're always trying to figure out ways of getting additional money from something that people may not like, you know?
Yeah.
So we have to find ways of getting more money in whatever form it is. And that again is a longer term issue, okay? It's not gonna happen tomorrow, it's gonna happen, hold it. It's gonna happen later on.
Yeah, I agree.
I do. I like the simplicity again of, I think Julie, you brought up the point about, keeping track of things. Now 17.5, and somebody's gonna calculate how many houses, how many dwelling units, on this, that, ADUs, was brought up
Right.
as an issue also.
That's a dwelling unit.
Okay, that's a dwelling unit. So somebody's gonna keep track of all that. To some extent, it's simpler to just say how many STRs are there, period. I don't care how many dwelling units or houses or what apartments or
Right.
whatever there are. There's this many.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's a disconnect. But keep in mind that, the fact is, nothing is forever. 5 years, 3 years, 4 years. Based on what actually happens, you can make all these tweaks.
Right.
So nothing is forever, but personally, I'm sort of leaning towards now simplicity and saying 2 per year or something like that. Just stick
Right.
with that. And then let's see how everything falls out.
Right.
What else happens out there. That's my thought. Anyway, parking. I know we heard from the police and others that it's hard to enforce. Who knows whether. But I don't know how this is done. But Judy, my wife, with some friends, had a rental in Lincoln City area, and very clearly in that communication was, you can only have this many cars, 2 cars, 3 cars. So they actually carpooled.
Mhm.
Not allowed. Okay. And now I'm sure there's no enforcement of that, just for all the reasons that we did. But it was very clearly communicated to people, you cannot have more than this many cars. And I suspect 50%, 60%, 70% complied.
Mhm.
And the moment you do that, you automatically solves some of the problems,
It needs to.
okay?
And we have that ordinance.
Yeah.
Well, I know,
don't we
but
do
it
that?
is a matter of communication when you make the rental
Yes.
orally.
Yes,
You cannot have that.
yes.
Yeah.
We do that.
What do you say?
It says you cannot, you can only park one car on the street and you must have parking for one car per bedroom.
Okay, see, that's too vague. That's too
No,
vague.
what he's
What I'm
saying.
saying is just tell you.
Well, but it says you can only have one car on the street. And they have to they have to give the renter a map showing where the parking spaces
No, I'm
are.
thinking, put it on the owner of or the manager of the rental, say you can only have this many cars coming in.
It is.
And they must be parked.
I would say
Don't
it
make
is.
one per bedroom, etc., but the.
Well, because you can't, if the house I rented in Lincoln City, I could have 5 cars.
Okay,
If it had been a 2-bedroom house, I could have had 2 cars.
but
And
what-
so you can't say 2 cars, 5 cars, you have to say this many per bedroom.
no, what I'm saying is each rental, each
Yeah.
house,
Yeah,
you know how many cars can be there, right?
yes,
So when somebody tries to rent that, the communication is simply only 3 cars allowed.
yes.
So
Yeah.
Period.
he's
That's
saying
it.
you do the calculation.
You do the
Yeah,
calculation.
Yeah,
Don't
yourself.
specific.
No,
Tell the
no,
renter.
I get it,
Yeah.
is that instead of saying, the verbiage saying 2 cars per bedroom for this house. Plus 1 on the street or whatever, there's a maximum of X cars
Yeah.
on this
On
street.
this house.
Which is the same information, but just communicated a little.
Different.
Differently.
And it could.
And
directly.
specifically.
You're
Yeah.
just telling somebody,
And I'm
here's how many
thinking,
cars.
that's probably done in many cases and not in others, but it doesn't prohibit, just as it doesn't in Lincoln City, because we did it.
No.
It doesn't prohibit us from parking on the street.
Correct, I agree.
But I think the issue that Anupam is making is it's clearer. I mean,
Sure.
it's just very clear. You can only have 5
Right.
cars, or you can only have 2 cars. And I suspect a percentage will abide by that. A percentage will not, for sure.
For sure.
But I
She
think the
did.
clarity, yeah.
But you know, the second will
Yeah.
abide. And the goal is to have voluntary compliance as much as possible.
Right, I think
Okay,
the
you never
clarity
get
of that
100%
makes sense.
compliance otherwise.
Yes. I
So the more we can sort of have voluntary compliance and stuff, it'll help with
So would you,
some of the
could you
issues.
have them state that 3 cars including street parking?
I think you'll have to
I
determine
think we,
each
I
each
think,
unit.
can I just stop you, because it's a different conversation.
Right.
Than what
Yes,
do
it
we
is.
want to
Always
make
go
sure
back.
that.
We always
council-
go back. True.
No, but it is, I think that's a thought that sometimes little tweaks like that can have an impact.
Exactly.
And I think that that's a very,
We can't legislate
Positive.
everything.
yes,
you know,
right.
so we
But you can make it
try
clear.
to make some differences here.
And if memory serves me right, we've had a lot of different, when someone is ready to ask us about our ideas about parking, I have notes from like the last few years.
Get out this book.
Yeah, let me just tell you all the things that have come across the table from when we reached out to all the communities to get some of our data. Parking was something that came up in all those conversations, and there's many, many ways to go around it. But I don't think it can be done in isolation of the STRs, but that actually is what you just said is probably a really positive suggestion to
And it
add.
can be done by the STR
And
committee at the
easy to
recommendation.
do. Because I think that this 2 per bedroom and 1 on the street, the 1 on that gets really, you can't enforce that.
No.
It sounds okay, but you just simply can't enforce street parking. Unless you go door to door and ask whose car it is, which is
Well,
not.
unless you have to start doing what they do in a lot of other towns, like where I grew up. You have to have a permit.
A permit.
So every owner, I mean, every time they rent that, have, 2 or how many ever is allowed, and if you don't have that on your car, you get ticketed.
Mhm.
Well,
They did that when we rented in Palm Springs.
Yeah.
They had-
so these are all good ideas, but I
Yes, let's go back,
Let's go
Michael.
back to non-parking.
and I got a lot to say, obviously,
Yeah.
I'm a transportation guy. So I mean, just maybe to just say maybe next step, we'll have space on the agenda today to talk about what those next steps are and how we'll start talking about issues around parking and traffic and noise and whatever else it is. And so I know Joe mentioned, well, I guess Linda you're the only one I hadn't heard feedback from on I don't know, on the.
On the presentation.
Yeah, did you have any?
Oh, no, I thought it was really good. I got really good feedback
Okay,
from
good.
council.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they were in awe of the work you guys, that we've done. I mean, they really were. I mean, you guys knocked it out of the park. The interesting issue is we have people here and we have people here. And it,
That's a good thing.
well, it is, and so the next step is for council to discuss the options. And in the work session in February, I talked to Layla yesterday and it's on the schedule.
Okay.
And the council is anxious to do that.
Okay.
I also think that they want to make a decision. We don't want to put I know Cody mentioned that there's a lot on the table, and there is a lot on the table. But we want to get this one off the table. We want to make a decision. I think Anna Palm's insights are absolutely correct. This is not forever. I think we should reevaluate it in a period of time, maybe 2 years. Just to make sure it's bringing the revenue that we need and that it's not complicating staff's life too much based on what ultimately the council decides. So long story short, I thought it was excellent. And the council was very appreciative of the work you guys
Did any of them ask you anything that they were not clear about, that we could make clear?
No, but I encourage, I think you should be at the workshop. And if a question comes up, you should be prepared to answer that question. I think your idea of sending something out early so they have a chance to look at it is a really good idea, so they can process that.
Right, and I just want the fine balance to be is just, that's what I was hoping we could tease out today, if there was something that we could be clear on.
Yeah.
One thing,
Not add to there. I have a question though, Linda, and I know you probably can't, I'm not asking you to go into great detail, but. For one, I don't understand how this process works. So, I mean, again, how it works overrun. So the council goes to work session and then what happens? And I know I'm not talking about dates and times, but how does the process work then? Then they make a recommendation or they vote on it or?
Yeah, then we would make a recommendation and there are gonna be really key players in this. Layla is a key player in this. I think Jerry is a key player in this, and I think Catherine. I think those are the three people that are gonna kind of guide this.
Okay,
Once it's done, then it is up to staff to create the ordinance
okay,
that we will ultimately vote on.
okay. That's, yeah.
So it's, and this, it may be November before that happens,
Okay.
but it is. Because we're always slower than we like, but.
Oh, we know.
Yeah, but I really do think we want to get this off the table. We want to make a decision. There's no sense putting it off any longer. We've already waited too long.
So can I ask a question, Linda? As I mentioned, there's in my mind, there were long-term, short-term. The short-term issue is the cap, what kind of cap should there be, and the other proximity and other things. You said there was a wide sense of feelings among council. Was it on the cap side or was it on the other issues?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think some counselors went in with a predetermined decision. In fact, I think most of them went in with a
Which
predetermined.
is what?
Well, on one case, we're gonna keep it at 17.5%. We're not gonna do proximity. If we need the revenue, we're gonna go for broke. On the other side is a more nuanced approach, concern about citizen input, concern about too many STRs, and the fact that proximity looks pretty good to them as a tool to use.
So they would vote for much more, maybe the 2 per year or something like that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Plus proximity and everything else.
Yeah, I think the proximity issue is really, my own personal opinion is it's going to depend on Layla and staff's ability to be able to do it without creating too much chaos. I think what Cody mentioned before is there's a lot right now on staff's table, and we're working at 120% right now, and putting an additional requirement on that may not work. But I don't think it means that it can't be done.
Right, and I think
In the
Layla
future.
has changed on that too, at least that's what I heard in the presentation, that it can be done. We'll have to figure out how to do it, but it can be done.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think her greatest concern is telling staff. You know,
Sure.
just asking staff to do more than,
Right.
I mean, she's
Sure.
been really good about kind of making sure staff is really well taken care of, and that's why we have really good staff. And really committed staff, so that, I mean, I have no idea what the end is gonna, what the decision will be, but I think there's gonna be a lot of really good discussion.
Mhm.
And the outcome could be, I mean, based on council's discussion and recommendation to staff with respect to like the staff report. It could be that the cap is slightly, it goes cap, but with a slightly different number, higher, lower, or it could be.
Yeah,
Incremental approach, and instead of 2 per year, it's 3. But like they could tweak what we put our best information forward, and they might like the proximity tool, but understand that it's complex and say. The policy should implement proximity density tool within time, but be less specific and let staff say, this is how we would do, this is how much it would cost. So there's a lot of
moving.
yeah, I mean, again, I can feel very confident in what we put forward.
mhm.
So I would love it if they, they were done with that. But council might have, some
Okay.
ideas or tweaks to it too. But
Well, and I think we have some really thoughtful people on council.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think it's gonna be a good discussion. I just changed from November 25 to November 26, based on your comments.
Yeah, wow.
It may take a lot longer to ultimately come to it, but a decision hopefully will be made.
There
to
were
start the
two,
process.
there were two things that I think I'd like to have clarified to the council. One was Brad asked a question near the very end and we didn't respond to it, but I think it's a misconception. He said, well, if we include the C1 zone in,
The cap.
the freeze, the cap,
Freeze.
the number, then we will be telling people in the C1 zone that they can not have a short-term rental. I mean, it wasn't quite worded like that, but if the number is 2 per year, let's say, so next year it'd be 265. And someone in the commercial zone wants to have a short-term rental, they wouldn't be able to have a short-term rental because we've already at the cap.
Added the two.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's true at that moment in time, but it's not true as soon as the cap drops, they would be able to, and I think that's a
Or as soon as there's a
misconception.
calendar year.
Yeah, it's the same, the commercial zone would be in the same position as anybody in a neighborhood.
Except I think his point was you want things in the
Yeah,
commercial.
Correct,
Yeah, I mean, rather,
yes, and that was one of the things that we had talked about at some point, was to
Exclude.
exclude the commercial zone in that number. But keep the numbers, so if they went, let's say it's 263.
Mhm.
That if they go, if a house in the commercial zone wants to be a short-term rental. It would go to 264, but that would mean that in the residential area. There would be a weight of 2, in other words,
Right, it would take up space.
it would take up space.
It would go to the front.
They
of the
would,
line.
they would jump, that was it, it would jump to the front of the
It
line.
jumps to the front.
So they would be first on the, even if there were five houses on the waiting list, if it was a commercial, it would jump to number 1 on the waiting list.
okay.
And that, I think we talked about that, and that was a good, so maybe we could include that as, here's an option if it, to make it.
Why didn't we do that? Because we did talk
I don't
about
know.
that.
I don't know, we talked about that in the.
Simplicity.
I
Yeah,
also
maybe,
think, yeah, we were something, one of the things that maybe that question is related to is. As council considers all these options. The implementation is pretty much the same as what's been implement it. There's a waiting list. So the word never, that's not.
That was the. and
That was the thing
what I
that came
think
up.
we
Yeah,
need to be
okay,
clear.
good
The
It's
never.
not that it's never going to happen, it's like,
Right.
oh, and that's true with any kind of cap,
Mhm.
you're on the waiting list, and when
It's
it's available.
included in
It's- and
the
the
17.5%.
This, any of them, all three, as well as the proximity is, it's not that you never can have this, it's that you're on a wait list. So when it it's for that to
Yeah.
happen, so it's not, I think I wanna be clear, it's communicated, we're not taking away anything. That opportunity, it's just managing those opportunities,
Mhm.
managing the growth, which is what we set out to do, is to put the growth back in the city's control.
Mhm.
To manage the growth versus a development or something just happening, and then all of a sudden, everybody's like, whoa, it's kind of what motivated the original. Survey and the freeze and all of that was just, let's get a handle on it.
So why did we take the commercial zone out of the number calculated?
It's, wait,
Why
it's.
did
Why did we put it in?
In.
Yeah.
But the.
Simplicity. We took it out from proximity, but we left it in to the total number just for simplicity. But one other thing that I found. When we said that there are 30 houses, 32 houses in the non-regulated area right now, so the freeze is 230. And then there's 32 additional for a total of 262.
Mhm.
We thought of that as a commercial zone, and it's not, and I don't know why.
Commercial in R4.
It's the commercial in R4, and we're talking
Ah.
about putting R4 in the big picture, because again, the comp plan people
Mhm.
are talking about doing away with all the R2, R3, R4 zones, because now they can all be R4, essentially.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so if that's one big zone, there's no way to say, yes, but this little sliver of that zone
Right.
can't be regulated by short-term rentals. So R4, I think we're pretty locked.
You couldn't separate the commercial zone out.
Yes,
No,
you
you
can
can't. You
separate
just
the
can't separate
commercial zone
R4.
out.
Ah.
You can't separate
It's
our.
everywhere.
Okay, gotcha.
And of the short-term rentals in the commercial LC and R4 zone, there are 6 in the commercial zone.
Really?
There are 7 in the LC zone, which is incorrectly shown on maps because it's showing the second hotel on Ocean
Yeah,
as in actually it's showing in R3.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it really isn't. It's just, it's mismarked.
yeah.
So I drove around there this morning. There are 7 homes total in LC, which what should be LC. I mean, some of them are marked as L2, but anyway. There's only 6 in the commercial zone. Most of them are in the R4, which will not be regulated. So we're talking about,
Okay.
a
Yeah,
handful.
a pretty small number.
I
And
think
so-
we should share that information because it's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Otherwise, and by the way, there's really no space, I mean, commercial is pretty narrow.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Lanita and then up division to Underhill.
Yeah, that's it.
so
And-
how many in the R4 and the LC?
There's 32 in R4 LC C1, but only 6 of them are in C1,
Okay,
okay?
Which I think is the critical thing, because
46.
as we move to the
Or
planning
state
commission in the
report,
state of
yeah.
Oregon, the new zoning, I don't know what
Right.
you're gonna call them. The R4 goes away, and after you get off the commercial, it's just
One.
Everything.
one thing.
SRR.
Another point
That's
on
all right.
the commercial zone that I talked to a member of the planning commission. Who said, well, I think we should be encouraging. If someone builds a home on Laneta, like they're gonna build right across from the Little Apple, that's gonna be commercial down below and 2 units up above. We should encourage that as short-term rentals.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
But wait, but wait.
Yeah,
Yes.
But wait. Why do we want to have work-live units? We wanna have work-live units
yeah,
because we want more middle housing, and affordable housing. And if we make them short-term rentals,
Good point.
So
they're
that's,
not.
Yeah.
thanks for bringing that up, Joe, because that has been bugging me, for a while now. And if you go back to the April 22 council meeting, I was actually advocating, that the freeze not include R4 and C1 because that's where you expect things like this. And the more I've sat on this, like, and I've also lived here 2 more years, like, I can appreciate, maybe 8 is an extreme of STRs, but I can appreciate having short-term rentals on my street just because it feels like there's people there. Whereas there's a lot of times during the year where it's just empty.
Yeah.
And so they do lend a sense of, and vibrancy is a squishy word, but they do lend a sense of vibrancy to our neighborhoods. And I think it's important. And what I'm getting at, and that's just kind of my opinion, but what I'm getting at is that I don't feel like our committee has clear direction from existing policy, and the comp plan is being updated now, so. It makes a lot of sense that there's some direction there that says, yes, we want to put STRs on our main street because that's for XYZ reasons. Or to say, you know what, work live needs to be downtown, it's a year-round anchor, we have people living there. During the off season, they can go to Little Apple, they can do whatever the businesses are. It's just two different takes on what we want. And as a committee, I'm okay implementing, or finding out ways to help supporting policy or ways to implement that policy. But I feel like there is a lack of policy direction on what should be happening in this. And when I think of where the affordable, we went through that housing exercise at the comp plan meeting, we're all sticking these things on a map, and it's like, yeah, and some of it made sense, but I would.
So my sense about all of this is that we've got two competing projects. One's a comprehensive plan and one is a short-term rental. And I'll go back to what Anupam said. I think we should make a short-term, my goal is to make a short-term rental ordinance that works today.
Mhm.
With the understanding that probably 2 to 3 years from now, it's gonna look very different. And council's gonna have to revisit.
Sounds like the mayor is not in favor of that approach. And she said she doesn't believe in making short-term policy decisions.
I think that's true. However, I think given the circumstances we're facing with two really major directional, and we have no idea what the comprehensive plan is gonna look like right now. We know we have some goals, we don't know what it really means right now, and it's gonna be another year, maybe 2, before we actually come up with that. So we can't guess that this is where it's going and make a decision based on our guesses. I think we have to make a decision based on today. And I feel comfortable in advocating for the fact that I think council needs to review this a periodic time.
Sure, and we've always said that,
Yeah,
although
I
we
mean-
put it at 5 years. But I think I think what you said is an argument for picking a number rather than the percent.
Right.
And for proximity now. Well, now, not like tomorrow, but now sometime this year.
Near term.
Because those two things will again keep the horse from getting out of the barn, because once you have the comp plan and the middle housing ordinances in place, it's going to be harder because you're already gonna have a fourplex or duplex or
Yeah.
Right.
you're already gonna have that. So to me, that's an argument to put in
Well,
place.
I agree with that. I think when I was going back, thinking about this after the work session, is so much of what we're dealing with right now wasn't even on the plate, at least, I mean, a year and a half ago.
Right.
And we kept saying, well, someday this will be blah, blah, blah. Well, that someday came really, really fast. And so it's almost, the urgency there to kind of keep that horse from, because it could explode, it could go south very fast. It could also be fine, but it seems the potential is there. So enacting something that stabilizes us to see how this all shakes out around, because I guarantee it's always easier to ease up on this than it is to try to pull back. And I think that's what we're trying to get at with that proactive versus reactive mindset, is that I think if the city is proactive on this, it can certainly make the adjustments to be go the other
Yeah.
way. I think that's much easier to do than to say,
You can't even do it, because once they're granted a short-term rental, you
yeah,
can't take it away.
right.
you can't take
So
it
it could be
away.
decades.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
Can I ask
Yeah.
why you can't take it away? I'm just curious.
I just think.
It's a land use
Land
right,
use,
and I think it's.
But once you grant a license,
Oh, well, if they violate
If they
it or they decide not to do it, then you don't have to reissue that one for that property, but you can't just go in and.
you can't, I mean, you have to renew it every year, right? Can you
Right,
say no renewal? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, I'm
I
not
don't
saying,
think that's a good question, I don't know.
why
Yes,
can't
you
we say no
could, you
renewal?
could,
Yeah.
Cannon Beach does that, but
but.
that's,
Traditionally, we have.
we would, that would be a
Traditionally,
whole
I'm just
different.
curious whether.
Yeah, you could.
I agree.
You could, I mean, some places do that, but you would have to totally, we'd have to start anew, make some
Yeah.
suggestions, council would have to,
Talk
but
about
it,
being a
yes, it could be.
It's a hot
Yes,
potato
it would be.
there.
City can just say, I'm
Again,
not
back to
renewing
my
it.
point,
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to be proactive than
Right.
reactive, because I think that's a whole hot.
All I'm saying, the only reason
that's a
for my
hot
question
mess
is,
there.
I want to get rid of all these myths.
Yeah,
Right.
We shouldn't assume that we can't do it. Just want to make sure that we can, but we don't opt to right now, that's fine.
okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
so
investigate.
that's all I
that, 'cause
wanted
don't
to
feel
make
like-
sure.
Though,
as we think about these
I'm
things.
thinking though of,
I thought there was
I
a
have to look at the
lawsuit.
way Cannon Beach does it, because you can get a 5-year license and then I don't know what happens next, because you cannot say. This house cannot be a short-term rental. You have to say, you can get on a waiting list, or you can't right now, but you can't say you can never be a short-term rental again.
No, I just want to.
I thought they had
Yeah,
a
that you
lottery.
can't
Didn't they
say.
have a lottery at some point?
That might be how they do it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's more complicated than,
Mhm.
There was one other thing that I think we should. Put in here's an explanation. A question came up about revenue and what did revenue look like?
right, revenue.
And I asked about, I said, let's look at before COVID too, because. So I did. And interestingly, in the 4 years before COVID, the revenue percent went up 35%.
The 4 years before COVID.
In the 4 years before COVID,
Revenue percent meaning.
35% increase in revenue.
Yeah.
Revenue
Okay.
from the STRs.
In the 4 years since COVID,
Mhm.
well, I think just a little before COVID, anyway, it was like 45%. And then it went down 2%. The numbers for this year look like it, I believe is what Chip said, looks like it will be back up again. But it hadn't gone down to the pre-COVID levels. It's pretty much, I mean, 2%, you know. It's pretty much stayed level, but so there was a COVID effect. But there was effect before COVID too. We've just been growing in revenue.
Mhm.
We've gone from $500,000 to $1.5 million in 10 years.
Yeah.
So I don't
Pretty
think we
ex-
can
the growth has
say
been
it was
exponential.
COVID. Yeah, the growth has been exponential. The housing growth, also interesting, has been 1 point in residential single housing units, has been 1.1% for 10 years.
You mean in terms of number of new homes
Yeah.
being built? Well, that
Yeah, so if you
shocks
look at
me.
I know,
You drive around, you'd think.
But you know, I was thinking about that because
Yeah.
down in our neighborhood is where the vacant lots were. Up in here, there aren't that many vacant lots left.
Yeah.
So
and it's
I-
residential homes
Residential.
too. But I thought, well, could that really be? Because that was from a report from the,
That's
that
including
was a water
Highland?
report. So then I looked at residential water hookups
No, I
and,
don't think that
Really?
includes the Highlands,
yeah, it does.
but I.
Because they're in city.
The hell could that be?
It's in
There's like
city. It doesn't include Pine
50
Ridge.
something houses.
But
Pine Ridge,
includes
it doesn't-
the Highlands.
And it also doesn't include the urban growth areas.
It does not include the urban growth.
So
which
the
is
other
Pine Ridge.
side of the golf, you know, the wind.
Yeah, but
up
neither
there.
do short-term rentals. So
No, I know.
it's
but they're there.
short-term rental area to short-term rental area, and I checked the
The
water
growth is
hookups,
interesting.
and it matches, it might not have been 10 years, it might have been 20 years. But I mean, it just,
pretty
So each
consistent.
year was
Pretty
1%,
consistent.
or did it have ups and downs and then it
Does that make
averaged?
any sense?
So,
I think
But it
that-
averaged 1% over, or was it?
1.18% according to this report.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand the Highland
I don't
question. I
understand
think
that
that,
The hidden questions is included in the number.
but that's,
That
in
doesn't
the,
make sense.
that doesn't make
That's
sense.
16 homes.
There's
a
only
year,
30
right?
homes.
Isn't that what it is, 16 homes a year,
Well,
or thereabouts?
yeah,
What about the cluster?
That sounds about right, 16 a year, like, think Highlands.
14 a year,
Or
yeah.
14 a year, just think over the 3 years they've been building up there, that's 45 homes or 40.
Yeah, total,
That's
yeah.
getting there. Oh, okay,
I
that's
think,
almost
Which is
I
an
think it's,
interesting
I mean,
number.
the numbers,
That is
I've seen the
interesting.
numbers and they do play out, but it doesn't seem like they should. But that's another good argument though, just
Your
going to the
perception
data
doesn't
versus
always-
just
yeah.
perception. Because we're down where we are, it's like, I can count 5 new homes and, it's like, wait, that can't be true, but I think that is
I
true.
could count them on my street.
Yeah.
There are how many new homes.
I think the other thing that might.
Two other
Can I just
suggestions.
ask a question, Joe? Do we have, when we talk about the revenue? Do we have, I know the revenue has gone up. And I know people are charging more. But did we look at that during the freeze? So the number's been pretty consistent around the 263. So is that revenue increase from what? People charging more?
It has to be because it's not a number of homes.
That's what I thought. So,
And that's what, I did a little spreadsheet, it's got
Mhm.
number of homes,
right,
revenue,
Is that adjusted for inflation then?
no,
Right.
just revenue and number of homes.
So maybe per unit number is probably higher, must change.
Well, I
I
think that's
I can't say that.
Yeah, must be.
yeah, I think it is when you look at the,
If it's a
I mean,
number,
just
the base is the
anecdotally, when
same.
you look at the
Yeah.
listings and what the cost per night is. I think if you did a comparison in the last 10 years, you would see exponential growth in that, and that's probably that COVID, where we have that perception of COVID
Can,
bump.
I wanna hear what you have to say, and then I have a comment on.
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I think just some thoughts on, one is revenue. And Michael, you're the only short-term rental owner that on this table right now, right?
Here,
Right.
Danielle.
Yeah, but Daniel's not,
too,
but just right.
as manager, but.
We focus on revenue numbers as being very sort of constrained in terms of number of units only. I don't know whether there are opportunities, and city should think about is additional fees from existing short-term rentals. The impact on an owner will be is that they will either have to charge more or cut back on their profits. Right? And I don't know the economics of this right now, but it would be interesting to get some input on what happened if the city decided to add another 2% fee. Could you pass that on to the person or not? And are you competing? Who are you competing with? So I mean, just you don't want to answer that, but just we need to, I'd like to sort of think about that.
Sure, I have a knee-jerk reaction, but there's a second part to the
Yeah.
question.
Okay, I'm gonna
But he's the rent,
pull
yeah.
us in a little bit, because I just looked at the clock.
Oh.
And I wanna make sure you said you have.
Cody says yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to go parking revenue and traffic. I wanna make sure you have time to share, and then if we have any thoughts about next steps or things that,
well, that's gonna go into the comment to the council.
Right,
yeah,
I don't wanna leave Anacom's question right now, because one of the issues that comes up a lot is revenue to the city.
right,
And there've been constant questions about, are we increasing that amount? Are short-term rentals increase? If there is some way we can validate that in the comment to the council,
validate,
the fact that rents are going up. It's not that
mhm,
revenue is increasing, and it is increasing not because we're increasing number of short-term rentals, but that short-term rentals are beginning to charge.
but that, I don't know that that's the case, it could also be that the number of days per year
That's what I was
has
gonna
increased.
say. If we don't know it, the
Yeah,
occupants,
that's a
number
good
of
point.
days.
Yeah, and I think that's probably more the case.
I think it's both, I don't think it's
Yeah.
one thing, I think
I mean, my house used to rent 12 12 weeks a year, that was good. I was doing good if it rented 12.
But I also think if you look at the listings, which we found is there are many more homes now that have a minimal stay,
Yeah,
that they didn't used to have that. I mean, I think it's not just one factor. I think definitely the cost per night has gone up. I think longer people are staying longer by design from the owners to cover their expenses. And the other thing about revenue, which I think is this unknown about raising it, is the Tillamook County
oh,
proposed increase in TLT tax, which is gonna go. Would.
And we get 70% of that, right? Any increase?
I don't know,
we get
no,
30%.
30%, yeah.
And I just talked to Mary Faith yesterday about that, and they're getting a lot of
Yeah,
pushback on
Push
that.
back on that.
So they've gone from 15 to 14%, but they're still gonna go forward with some kind of increase.
Increase, and
For
that,
sure.
and we increased from
I will tell you
250 to
one other thing I'd
850
like
on
to
the
put on
light.
the
Yeah,
table.
yeah, we can.
Here's my second point, and then we don't discuss it today. I think we suffer from a lack of information and data. You know, we're guessing as to how many days, this, that, and anything else. I think it's very easy, and again, Michael will have some point of view on that, is for when a report, or monthly or quarterly, whatever reports that are provided, to put down on that how many days it was rented, you know, the unit was rented, you know, something like that. So it will help with some information that we can make better decisions then.
Isn't that on
Okay.
when you pay your taxes to the city? Isn't that on there? How many nights?
It
Yeah,
is not for a city, but it's for county.
yeah.
County asks that, and I do report that, and it's easy enough to, you know, if you go through a third party intermediate, you can.
Yeah, I mean, all the management companies will have that information automatically, you know.
It's getting it from them.
But yeah, but that's what just makes it that's part of the rule. I mean, it's not
So
a
we
matter of.
don't ask for it currently.
right, but that's what he's saying.
Yeah, so
How
we could ask
you
for
could
it.
ask for it because it's not, it wouldn't necessarily,
Especially if you have to
it's
do it,
there,
if
it's
you have to do it
there.
for the county,
Yeah.
you've done it
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly, you've done it already, so it's not a big deal.
I think that's a really valid point.
But every quarter, every month, so we can
Not for us,
normally
but
look
for
at
the city.
seasonality of the rentals, so, cause right now, if somebody asks me. Well, I think it's pretty dead in winter, but it's active in summer, but I don't know.
Yeah.
The rentals, so
Yeah.
I think if we have that more information, we'll be better educated, the council will be better educated about what's actually happening. You know,
Well, and we can ask when next, before the next, you know, if this is ongoing need, Danielle probably has the best access, or any of the other
Yeah.
management companies to be able to see, you know,
Yeah.
what those seasonality, I mean, I'm just one data point. I mean, it drops off so much after, and I'll try to move on, Cody's being real patient. But on these tangents, but, you know, it drops off so much after September.
Yeah.
That we just started blocking off the off season, like, you know, because it doesn't make sense. I go over there and I gotta move my home office over there, like, so I have more space for us in our other
Quiet.
place. Yeah, that too. And so it is a stark
so
drop
you
off.
see, that's
Yeah.
information that's very important to communicate. Listen, we have a summer problem, we don't have a all year problem in terms of STRs, okay?
I think we've disproved that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
I think that.
How do we know that?
Because the
Well, it is
management
the
companies,
data.
we don't know it exactly, but I
We
think
don't
the
know.
management companies have told us that.
Okay,
Yeah.
but
So,
okay, let's
so is there
document that.
anything that in this, because I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I agree, but it's not gonna impact
Right.
our discussion with the council. So is there anything from that discussion that could go into your summary email? Or just leave it alone and have it as something that is a topic for further?
That's where I'm going, and that was
Okay.
gonna be my comment after, you know, I talked about, you know, the revenue or fees and that, but I think what. I tend to take things at face value. I mean, the city came and made a report on what revenue is and why they need it, and I think the big takeaway from Layla's presentation was like, you know, don't upset the apple cart type of thing, right? And so that's why, and I remember Joe and I had this conversation like, I don't know, a year ago at this point, when we were talking about percentage or caps and everything. And you said, well, why not incremental? And I was like, yeah, I really like the 17.5, yeah, for other reasons, because I think it's smart policy. But when I said, you know, in absence of a more robust, you know, economic, you know, report on revenue needs, infrastructure needs, and forecast. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. The best we can do is look at historic and or what the city's telling us and say, okay, let's just keep with that trend line. that's the simplest, like, it's lo-fi way of doing it, you know, versus getting into analysis when we don't have the data necessarily, or we feel like we need to wait for the data. And so that's why I caution about like trying to do anything more with revenue, because the city's, you know, again, at face value, the city's given us a report. They've said this is the deal. I don't think it's our role to necessarily like challenge those assumptions.
No, but I do think it's important to include the information, because one of the possible, what I think one thing that needs clarification is. We have a the revenue from STR has grown exponentially. Since the freeze has been in effect.
Well, and I think the city's counterpoint, and again, I'm just trying to, I think the city's counterpoint would say, yeah, the COLAs have gone up for my staff, the cost of materials have gone
Oh,
up.
excellent.
like,
All
so-
of those are,
so-
all of
so
that
it's
is
not-
accurate,
I feel
but
like
I
we're
think providing the data is a good thing.
the data,
Here's
that's
the
all I'm
revenue,
saying is the
okay.
data is there because and that discussion of my staff and this and that. In my opinion, leads us back to diversification of revenue, because all of those things continue to go up. And is it prudent to then rely, oh, well, then we have to include, so short-term rentals need to go this way, or do we need to think about the situation differently? All we're providing is the data.
Linda, you said that committee is no longer.
No, I didn't say that.
Cody
Cody
did.
said that.
Oh.
I disagree with that. I think it's mothballed at this point in time. But it's critical. I mean, and I don't know when and if, but it is definitely something we have to go back to. And I think the argument, that you just made is the argument. I mean, if we continue, I mean, so short-term rental is probably likely gonna go up to 14%. And we're gonna get 30% of that, which is great. But man, I mean, what happens if we have another epidemic, and only this one is, don't go to the coast because that's where it's centered.
Right.
We're dead in the water. We've gotta diversify. our
Or things you can't control, there's a recession and gas is expensive.
Exactly.
So I just
Or the
think that
volcano
diversity.
explodes off
Yes.
Cannon Beach.
Right.
Exactly.
And then there's that.
Or the tunnel goes down.
Well, that's what I mean, though, I mean, so I think that sharing that data is important, because. We have had exponential growth there, from 500,000 to 1.5 million in a relatively short time, given where we are. And it's a one-trick pony kind of thing, I mean, we have to know it's doing really well.
Has it really gone up by $1 million from 500,000 to 1.5 with the same number of units?
Not the same
Not the
number,
same
but
number.
not a
So
50% growth in
means is
growth
the
in units.
pricing has gone up dramatically. Has your pricing gone
No.
up?
Not the pricing, it could be the number of nights
Number of
rented.
nights are rented.
Yeah. So,
But that's what I mean,
Yeah.
both
Well,
things are
That's why we
true,
need that information.
both things are
Exactly,
true,
exactly.
this is kind of, we just
Yeah.
circled back now. Both things are true, and that's why I think the data is important to share, just for that point of.
what's the point of it? And I'm not trying to be snarky or anything, but what's
the
what are we
point?
trying to
Yeah.
communicate? I mean, so thanks for doing that. I mean, that's
Well, I
interesting.
did it because the question was asked. We need to know what the revenue is. We need to know how it's grown.
Okay, so it'd be in response to the prompt from work
It
session.
was
There
it was a question asked at the work.
And I think if we
That's fine.
submit that, we should also add to it, it could be because of pricing, it could be number of rooms, etc., rental number of days, so that it's
Yeah.
clear, it's not just,
It's a multiple.
it's not just,
Okay.
explosion of
Yeah.
pricing.
That's fine, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, that makes
Okay.
sense, sorry.
Which makes sense, during COVID, people were sort of staying.
But it wasn't just COVID. I think that's
No, but
an
even
interesting
post-COVID,
point. Pre-COVID, it was 35% in 4 years.
yeah,
Well, there was a big run up, rates were still low. I mean, we can
yeah,
talk.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could just chase our tail on that one.
Weather.
Yeah.
How many sunny days?
I think maybe, yeah.
No,
New
sunny
gas
days.
power. Let's track the sunny days.
Shirley lost control.
I lost control a long time ago, but it's been a while since we've been together, so it's nice to hear everyone's voice. Cody, do you have anything to add to this right now?
Or anything you disagree with.
Or anything you can,
Yeah,
what the heck are they doing?
yeah, right.
Yes, same as earlier, obviously revenue is extremely important, at least from a staff and service provision and maintenance perspective. Again, that's not your focus, that is a different committee's focus, and that's staff's focus. It's just lack of bandwidth there. A few things though stood out. I think Michael and Linda mentioned some form of policy definition and consistency. And so if you're, as a committee, really looking at the problem, and when I'm looking at it from based on what you said, it seems like the problem at least was or is livability. I would try and keep that as your focus then. That's the problem that's trying to be solved. And then your goal as very obvious, increase livability. And your
Right.
current policy solution has been to address that problem and attain to that goal by limiting or slowing the growth of STRs. And I liked what is it Anupam? Is that how you say it? He was just trying to address the problem in a different way. So instead of limiting or slowing growth, right, you are focusing on the individual aspects of livability. You're focusing on parking and you're focusing on traffic. And so you're saying, well, let's just minimize the number of cars at each STR and therefore limit the impact that each individual STR has on the aggregate, which is another solution. And I would say that's extremely valid and not peripheral, right? If it's the job of the committee to offer recommendations, specifically policy recommendations, you'd offer them all in one bucket thus far, how to limit or slow the growth of STRs. But another policy solution would be how to minimize the impact that each individual STR has
Right.
on the aggregate. And I would say that's very important.
Well
so really understanding your policy framework.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And if you haven't gathered from just sitting in our meetings, we really struggle with balancing what our prime directive here is, like, focus on cap and density, which has been like, the charge from day one, with all these other livability issues that we have very real experience, tangible experience with parking, barking dogs, noise, all those things. And so I think the approach, at least, and steer me right if I'm wrong, but like, is to put forth these big things now, and then to set up at our meetings, even if it's November 25 or 26, we can be focusing, like, maybe there's a theme or a focus area for these more
Issues around livability.
yeah, and break them up into traffic, parking, noise,
Right.
and so we're still chunking things off, and who knows, maybe we present another report a year from now with that as a package, and whether,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
go
think-
back though, because I think long ago, when we first met, which was 3 years ago, this discussion, we went around, for those of us that are still here, and a very conscious decision was made to start with the citywide cap, because we felt like once we had an understanding of what the policy around that was going to be, then these livability issues would be easier to address. Because we can address the impact of a car or noise or whatever, but the questions that came up from the citizens group meetings we had and the survey was keep the number of STRs the same. That was something we heard over and over again way back when. So that's why we focused on that, not the numerical or a ceiling cap or whatever, then the proximity. But I think you're right. Now, that's a very good way to move forward, is addressing the livability issues. But I don't want to, flip it.
Right.
Yeah, I think
One is they're
yeah.
interdependent on each other, because you can manage the STRs beautifully and have all these livability in place, but if you have 14 STRs on your street, you're still going to have livability issues.
Yeah, I like the clarity of,
Yeah,
we could, the problem is livability, there's two ways to look at it. One is the big picture, one is the small picture, basically.
Mhm.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say, because I'm gonna keep saying it as long as I am still on this committee,
which is.
one thing that we should.
Which is forever, right?
One thing you should really look at is what
Lifetime
Palm
membership.
Springs does, and that is find the renters.
Yeah.
not.
No, what do they call it in schools where you just once and you're out?
Okay.
No
Zero
warnings,
no warning.
no,
No
yeah,
tolerance.
no, yeah, a zero
Zero
tolerance
tolerance.
policy. Fine the renters if there's noise, parking, dogs, whatever,
Right.
fine the renters, not the owners.
I think that's.
I think that's a beautiful policy that would do a lot, but that's,
So these are.
but that's on the second
Those are-
part.
Yeah, those are future discussions.
Yeah.
I just said, I just need to say it once a meeting, so that.
Yeah, but I think to Cody's point, I think
Yeah.
we really, in my view, have had two directions. One has been to make sure that the financial integrity of the city remains. We understand that's not really our purview, but it is critical because we're gonna go nowhere unless we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, we did a number of surveys where livability issues were key.
Mm-hmm.
And it is important that we address both of those things.
Right.
And so I think, what Cody is, I think we kind of got off our direction, and what Cody's pointing out is let's make sure we identify that we're looking at both of those,
Mhm.
and that ultimately there's a lot more we could do around livability in the future, but it is not something that we're dealing with in this.
We've got
Yeah,
in the
I
parking
like
lot,
that.
we've got.
They would put
we've got
it, but it's
another-
it's an important part.
Yeah.
To underscore that.
Yeah.
Because so they don't keep trying to pull in these livability issues into the decision for these other larger policy. So
Yeah,
I
because
think-
livability, I mean, that really, that's what the citizens are really looking for.
Right.
That's why we ask them. We need to have an answer for them.
Well said. I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to summarize it. Okay.
So what is going on in the letter then? Do we have a 1, 2, 3 or what do we?
I think I need to process this a little
Yeah,
bit
and
more.
you do a draft and send it around. and-
Did I do a draft?
No.
No. I
Future, future.
I don't have time to discount it. Nope, didn't do that. Julie, have you been working on that?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna stop
Um,
taking notes about.
I'm trying to capture what each point, I think what we need to do is compare our notes before
Yeah.
any letter is drafted, to tell you the truth. But I summarized it in that, we wanna provide some clarification about revenue considerations. That's been our priority, and that's where the question, I think we can work that with Brad's question into the numbers.
Mhm.
I don't think I can speak right now to what the 2 or 3, can anybody, because I just have a bunch of notes here by,
Right.
I went back each time one of you said.
I think,
something.
yeah, that and what, I think maybe start with what Cody said about what's the
The
problem,
need for.
Yeah,
what's the ability,
Mhm.
what's
Yeah,
the solution?
yeah.
We can go big picture, small picture,
Sure.
house by house, big picture.
Managing growth.
We've done big picture, but we do still need to talk about small picture, and that's, again, proximity. Talk about the numbers, the answer the questions that
Mhm.
both Brad had and Jerry had. Brad about the C1 zone,
right.
and Jerry about the numbers.
Jerry, about the numbers,
But the revenue.
revenue numbers, that's what I thought. So we have the
Brad had a
revenue
question on
numbers,
C1, Jerry.
the C1, the
Um,
zoning question.
Yeah,
Can you deal on the commercial zone with the fact that there are only 6?
yeah,
Right,
Okay,
I have that.
perfect.
but again, in the LC, there's another, well, in the LC, there's another 3, but if you really count where the LC should be, there's 7.
Yeah, okay.
It's just. I don't
Is
know.
there a clarification, is that actually LC, it's just wrong on the map? Or
I
is
don't
it not?
know.
Okay, there's.
I
a
don't
good
know.
question.
I mean, I look at the map. And I see that the hotel is in the R3 and it can't be.
Mhm.
So I don't know what the problem is.
I think, though, to be really honest, we've been pretty
Lax.
historically lax
Yeah.
on that, but now it's becoming
Yeah,
more important. I think with the comprehensive plan,
There's
we'll
gonna-
deal with that.
right, yeah, so I don't think
That's
it's
kinda like a
particularly an
footnote.
issue, I just.
No,
think it's there, it's not,
Yeah, it's not something I think we should bring up. and-
yeah, exactly, I don't think we should even get into it, it's
Yeah.
just.
What's the
Yeah.
date of the February work session?
13.
13th, I think, yeah. Maybe, no, 12th.
Oh, and I will not
Well, my
be
thinking,
available, most likely.
well, we can tune in.
You guys can answer questions.
We can tune in. Why don't we say that in the next week. Or even the next 4 or 5 days, we'll get a draft of the letter done, the email, not even a letter, the draft of the email that we're gonna send to councils, and we'll send it out to the committee members. Not to rewrite, but just to make sure we've captured clarifications, captured it all. And then our goal would be to get that out to council by the end of next week. Does that seem like a reasonable timeframe?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay,
because we will confirm next week the workshop at
Yeah.
council.
And do we, I listened to the workshop session. But I started to keep track, but I didn't keep track of all the questions that were asked. And we should probably go back, at least I'll go back and look at
That's a
the
good
questions
idea.
again. Let's make sure we've covered all the questions.
Questions that people have, I
Yeah,
think
the
that's a
That'd
good
be
idea,
great, that would be
clarifications,
great.
you know.
that would be really helpful.
Yeah,
And I think, again, I think new questions are gonna come up based on
Oh,
the
sure.
direction of the discussion, and that's why access to the committee is gonna be really important.
Good question, what's gonna happen to the freeze? When it expires?
We can extend the freeze, so I'm not really worried about that. What I'm worried about is that we use it as an excuse not to make a decision.
Oh.
Because we can say, okay, it's gonna be next year before we do that.
Right.
And that's an easy way out, and I'm hoping we don't do that.
Okay,
yeah,
so.
I mean, so that kind of is the next step, the immediate next step.
Mhm.
And I guess the next question is if we want to schedule another meeting to talk about livability issues in February, do we want to wait until we get some feedback from council on that? What are your thoughts about that?
Go ahead.
I mean, my view is I think we should focus on it.
Mhm.
I think, as Joe knows, talked about low hanging fruit. I think there are many things that we should probably take a look at.
Mhm.
Or at least start talking about them, so we can make some decisions on this.
Mhm.
Because livability is, whatever we do here is not going to solve the problem. If that, to the extent a problem exists, in terms of how people feel about.
Right, the feeling.
The only thing that'll help that is as we start addressing some of the core issues, and there are some things we can do and some things we can't do.
Mhm.
But let's start talking about that so that we can make a list of recommendations to
Ideas.
changes
Mhm.
to either rules or whatever, however it gets changed.
I like that idea. I would recommend kind of structuring it. So I think there'll be time on agenda next month to kind of debrief about the work session, whatever discussion was there. So I think that, I mean, just as far as agenda build, there'll be a need to talk about that. But I would propose going through based on what was highlighted in the livability survey. I mean, I think that's something we can hang our hat on and say there's obvious, community's obviously pointing us in these directions.
Mhm.
Whether that's, if traffic was the number one, we should talk about it. Even if it is like, there's not a ton of impact we can make, but let's at least get the ideas on the table, have the discussion. And we can go through traffic, parking, noise, whatever.
Dogs,
Dogs, yeah, and then what I'd like to do
Finding renter?
is, right, and things like that. And so, and
Poor
what
Max.
I maybe would make sense
Yeah,
is,
right.
once we have this compiled,
Changes his job
from our kind of
significantly.
brainstorming sessions, is to then at that point invite, so we can make, if we can go through them all in one, invite law enforcement or code enforcement or city staff to then kind of tether us back down. But at this point, we're just trying to get some ideas on the table, and I would hate for I don't want us to police each other on what we think is practical or anything. Let's just get the ideas out there, and that'll start to shape those discussions. That's kind of what I'd like to do, but I'm open to.
I like that because quite frankly, at this point, in terms of the big picture thing about harmony and cap and stuff, we're done.
Yeah.
It's up to the council now.
Mhm.
We may respond to questions,
Right.
but at this point, we're done with that.
Right,
issue.
Yes,
Let's move to the next phase.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
livability.
there's going to be some questions about what that next phase would be. So I would really appreciate it if you could in a separate document, put down what you want to do in the second phase. I think that's going to be really important, and I'd like to have that for the workshop.
Okay.
I think that's really important. And then Cody, I think it's also one of the things we haven't done historically is we haven't communicated with the community what's going on. And that newsletter that I'm assuming you put together with Leila's help. I'd really like us to do some focus on what the role of the short-term rental committee has done, what resources they used, i.e. the surveys. And hopefully after the February meeting, kind of what those next steps are going to be. Because I think, we talk about livability, well, it's great, but people need to know about it. And need to understand it and need to have the ability to ask questions. So if you could ask Leila if that would be something we could focus on in the next newsletter, I'd really appreciate that.
I can, yes.
Okay, thanks.
And thinking way a little bit farther out, just since you mentioned the survey, I'm thinking when some of our term, our terms are up, it'd be great because a chunk of us here were around when we wrote the updated livability survey. I would like to leave, because we'll probably be doing the survey in another couple of years. And it'd be nice to kind of put like almost like an exit thing. Here's what considerations you should do next time you do the survey, livability survey. Because I know there's a lot of feedback once we got, and tremendous response on the, I mean, it was so great to see that. Obviously, a very engaged community. It's just, so if there's things that we need to, what are the things we need to make sure we're consistent, so we compare apples to apples, and what were the things that we might need to tweak to where we can better characterize community sentiment around some of these issues, so we can track it and help shape just, the health test on short-term rentals in our community, and the policy that had hopefully been adopted at that point. So
We also have a survey writer expert.
yeah, well, okay.
Oh,
Well,
amen.
I'm sure that you think about assignments on that, because that'd be good to sort of assign. I remember looking at the owner responses, owner manager responses, feedback. There were some great comments and great suggestions about how to improve the whole process. And I would love to have, like Michael and maybe Danielle or something to go through those responses from the owners and quickly review them and say, hey, here's some good ideas. That'd be a good basis, because these are the people who are actually impacted most also from one side. So let's get those ideas on the table.
Okay. Do you, Cody, as far as like our work plan, I mean, is there something, I don't know, I just kind of threw something out as far as pointing to what was identified in the 2023 livability survey as far as those pain points that we can try to get some quick hit, low hanging fruit policy to help address that. I mean, is there any other thoughts on how we might structure meetings or review or like, is it brainstorming around those implementation or supporting policy?
Yeah, I obviously joined your process here on the very back end, and so I didn't know what sort of coding and analysis went into that initial survey. I had assumed it was quite a lot with all the information you guys are throwing around. I guess it'd just be going through that again if it wasn't robust enough the first time. Maybe I could just ask a clarifying question that's somewhat unrelated to your question. I apologize. If I'm going to try and communicate this to the community, can I ask what problem statement have you been using thus far? If it's not livability, like what has your primary policy statement been?
I would think that would be our mission.
Yeah,
The mission statement, which is on, if you go back to the presentation.
Isn't it? It's half revenue, half livability.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, and it's education.
It's
and
balancing the
outreach.
needs of plus education.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we need to talk about is the education and outreach we've done.
Right.
The fact that we now have a code enforcement guy, khaki pants guy, full time. And so, I mean, I think all of that needs to kind of go into I mean, we've done a lot.
We did the,
Two surveys?
we did 2 surveys, we did community meetings, we also did the
Good neighbor,
County,
the good neighbor letter,
Yeah.
and the
letter.
essential phone number,
Yeah.
sticker.
Yeah,
I'm
Which-
just from all of that though, do you have like a concise problem statement?
Yeah, Cody,
What
probably
is the thing we're actually addressing?
the closest thing that you'll probably find to that is in the report, when we talk about our core policy framework. It was just a need to, I should have memorized at this point, but it was a need to, there's a need to manage growth in a way that balances livability with,
yeah, there is
you
a
know,
statement
revenue.
there.
That's what we're trying to do, and the assumption then is that whatever mechanism is in place right now is not adequate, it's not addressing livability needs. Or is it responding to the fiscal, sensibilities of our community, so.
And
Yeah,
that from the charge council gave us when we first started, there was a statement council
Yeah.
gave us to do the work, right? Am I right on this?
Mhm.
And that we framed our mission statement around that, we can look it up.
Yeah, we'll look it up and
Get
we'll
it
shoot
to
you
you.
some
We'll-
things that'll
we'll
help
get- So
you.
you don't have to search for it, we'll get it to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There was
I would just on your end, and then Linda brought this up as well, that there were predispositions coming in to this last conversation. Some who were more focused on revenue, right? That's the problem in their minds, and some who were focused more on livability, right? That was the problem in their mind. If you're not addressing a clear problem, we're all going to come at this from different angles, right? Those who have more of a revenue problem versus those who have more of a livability problem. And I can help with this, but you need to figure out what is the actual problem you're addressing, just so we're all coming to the same table instead of still living at 2 different tables. Which I would say we're still living in 2 different rooms here. That's
and how would you explain it to them to solve that?
Again, I would start with the actual problem. So, right, you gathered a ton of great data from the community, and it seemed like, this is what I thought, it seemed like the problem had to do with livability, and the characteristics being parking, noise, traffic, right? And there are obvious policy recommendations in order to solve that problem and reach a goal of increased livability. You could also have a problem statement of, we need more revenue. And there are obviously policy solutions to that with a goal of increased revenue. But you're living in different places at that point, which is why I think there were predispositions coming in, and there might still be those same dispositions coming out, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and I guess the way that maybe we could, if there's a perception out there, right, that it's about increasing revenue, then maybe we need to do a little bit, retool our messaging, because it's always been about minimizing impact to revenue or maintaining revenue. I mean, so we're not, the focus was, and that wasn't ever the purview. We don't have that. The type of data, I mean, we pull it in to look at historic revenue and that kind of stuff, but we're not economists, we're not, so the best we can do is try to maintain, a status quo or thereabouts for revenue while addressing these livability issues.
I think that dichotomy, if that's the right word, though, the problem is the people taking the survey could care less, well, maybe not,
Oh, they could care less.
they could care less about revenue and money.
Well,
They just want their services, it's magic how it happens.
Right, right.
well,
And the economists on the council, which is not all of them, but some of them, care more that, yeah, and understand that you have to have more money when you get more people. But the survey is never gonna reflect that.
But I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit because I think we heard loud and clear, and I think Cody, part of the challenge with this is you kind of just had that figured out. What's been the biggest challenge for this committee is we were given the task of addressing both of those issues. We were saying, we need to define livability, you need to get in there and get information about livability, but be very mindful that we cannot have a significant impact on revenue. In fact, we need revenue to grow because this is how we provide services. So there was never a way we could separate both of those, because we had many conversations, just brainstorming ideas. And then realized we would, there's no way you could possibly do that. I think people in the community, for the most part, understand the need for revenue from STRs to provide services to our community. And we heard that in the sense of the proximity measure was kind of about that, in that if we're all getting the benefit of this, we all need to be in this together. And that was one way of doing it. So I don't know how we separate those out completely, because I feel like the work we've done has always, we've looked at the livability, then played around with it in terms of any impact it would have on revenue, and tried to put forth plans that would have a positive impact on livability while not having a negative impact on revenue. And I think that's been that kind of is our work in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I think that says it. I think the fact that we've been talking about options for the number of short-term rentals is clearly focused on livability, with the concern that we don't want to put forth something that would have a huge impact on the finances. So our financial issue is only a mitigating factor. It isn't, it's something we were very cautious about,
Right.
but it's all been livability. So, the incremental growth, the 17.5%, that those suggestions are based in the context of livability.
I would also add to that is the issue about proximity and density is part of livability.
Right.
I mean, that came directly from, I don't want too many homes next to me, I don't want large homes next to me. All those
And that
things.
gets
So
into
that's
the
part of
parking and the
livability.
dogs and the,
So those are
and
the
the
big
traffic.
picture livability issues. Now we want to get to the next level of livability issues about, the dogs, the
Yeah.
noise, the parking and things.
So
of that sort.
I think that is really the key.
Yeah.
We really took the macro
Mm.
issues, and that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
What we look forward to is dealing with the next level, which turn out to be pretty complex, actually.
yes, it did.
But aren't included in this first kind of go around. I think the way you stated it is absolutely right.
And because from my recollection is that what the council charge was, this freeze expires in April 2025. Give us a recommendation as to what we should do about the freeze.
Give us option. Give us
Options, yeah.
options.
Options for how to deal with
Right.
when that expires. So that's what we were focused on. These were the options that we came up with. Now it's the next step.
And also some of these livability issues in this micro, if you want to call them, I think it gets back to that conversation about complaints reflecting what the livability is. They're not really against the law. They're just irritating to immediate in neighborhoods and deeply influencing how you feel about the STRs and your proximity because of the noise or whatever, that no one's doing anything against the law. It's just ramping things up to a level where you're uncomfortable or it's impacted your livability.
Does that make sense, Cody?
It does, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
we just need a concise way
Yeah.
to put that.
Can I? So this is a different conversation. Right. Right. Problem is, right, livability. Your primary solution being, right, limit or slow the growth of of STRs.
The impact, limit or slow the impact STRs have on on our community, not
Well-
to necessarily limit or stagnate,
They maintain
to the revenue growth.
maintain the growth.
We want to
Yes,
maintain revenue growth.
Yeah. I know you're saying impact, but you're only addressing the impact through slowing the growth of STRs, right?
No, we're also doing it through proximity and occupancy.
I think it's managed, I never liked slowing, I liked management is a better
Yeah.
word.
Because
Manage growth,
Sure. Yeah.
manage growth, it's not.
I mean,
stopping
to
it.
me, the growth number, whether it's 2 per year or 17, whatever, is almost less important than occupancy and proximity. I think occupancy and proximity will have more of an effect on livability. A word that I hate, but you know,
But that you own.
but that I own. I think those two things will have more of an effect than the number of STRs.
Correct.
And the little things, like you said, the doing it house by house, what's the problem here? Let's try to fix that. I think those are a bigger issue because you ask people in the survey, how many STRs are around you? Do they have a big impact? It was kind of a mixed answer. It was kind of a lot of no's, some yeses. And so it's not that there are STRs that bother people. It's how many are right around me, how big are they, and the parking and the traffic.
Well, I think there were some people that,
Yeah, there was some, you know, I
Anyway.
think it went,
all
yeah.
right,
Well, and Cody, I think you got the reaction from us that you saw because slowing growth, I mean, it just carries. We're trying to maintain the incremental growth that we've seen because when you feel, we're all concerned about was middle housing goes in, like we were talking about earlier, all of a sudden X amount of units are there and then the equation changes and now they're possibly, if interest rates were lower, we might see a bunch more applications that makes STRs more accessible to more people or
Right.
something like that. So, but we're trying to maintain the incremental growth because what we were seeing, like at the beginning of formation of this committee, was that it felt like there was a lot of construction happening around us and I think the community felt that too. And so we were hearing it from the community. And so we're really about maintaining that historic growth. And that's why,
manage.
managing the.
And I think that's a
incremental
good
growth.
point is all of the recommendations, the 2 per year is based on the historical trend of growth we've had over,
Yeah.
it's not like pick that number to shut it down. We picked that number to maintain the level of growth we've had. Anyway, on that note,
So is that clear? Yeah, are we, in terms of responding to Cody, are we gonna send him a copy of our mission statement?
And
And
the
the
core
policy,
and,
yeah, so
yeah,
that he has
anything
that.
that'll help him. And maybe just a short, here's what we've done in the last
Yeah,
5 years.
yeah, which includes the education.
And the
as well.
10-3,
Yeah, okay, yeah. So hopefully that will help Cody.
and feel free to reach out if,
Yes,
that-
absolutely.
yeah, if it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of that, but yeah, if you could just maybe send it all in one package.
Yeah.
And I think this is just a broader policy conversation that we might not get to, and that's okay. I know we're just kind of wanting movement on this issue, and we'll use what we have thus far. But yeah, if I can get at least a package of all that content, that would be great.
Okay,
We can do that.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks for your
Thank
help.
you.
Thank you.
And insight. It is really, I know you're getting a lot of feedback from us in real time and we got opinions because we've been so closely tied to this for so long. But it is really, really helpful for us to hear your perspective on this because it has clarity and like.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
Cody's getting a lot of feedback from Layla as well, so
Yeah.
it's,
it helps.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we wanna make sure you're comfortable and clear with this, and so we'll send you the one piece of information, but then please call us Joe and Cheryl, just to, if there are any questions, because you're kind of caught between the rock and a hard place right now.
Are we the
And we
rock or
understand.
the-
Are we the rock? I'm not commenting.
Thanks, Cody.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
Cody.
joining
Thank
us
you.
today. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
everyone.
I appreciate it.
You can end the
I was
meeting.
gonna give that to
Yeah,
you.
yeah, meeting, we can adjourn the meeting. There we go.